Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this in-depth ag forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. I got a few things I'm going to try to accomplish in this video. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the very long-range forecast that was just released from both the ECMWF and the NMME. We're then going to turn our attention to the possibility of what we call a miracle March for the West, what that might mean for the rest of the country by looking at the European weeklies and also talking about the MJO. And then we're going to get into our normal 2-week outlook and even have a quick discussion about the polar vortex. So you've been staring here at a map of our latest drought monitor, and I showed you this last Thursday, but what I want to be thinking about here is what are going to be the primary controls on the long-range forecast. Remember, with these long-range weather forecast models, they often stick to persistence. In other words, what they're started with, which in this case is something like 72% of the country in drought that's really focused right into this region and throughout the West, they're going to attempt to carry that moving forward. You see, in the model is what's going on currently with the soil moisture. And you can see that it's extended this drier region that's throughout the southern and central plains up to Nebraska, and it extends into the western Corn Belt and even over here into parts of southern Michigan, into Ontario as well. And this is an area that's seen some drier conditions as of late, even though some heavier snows did move into here in the last week or so. Now, thinking about that, I do want to show you the latest snow water equivalent. So this would not be moisture that is yet into the soil that would melt when we do get some warmer temperatures. And I want to just point out a couple of important things here. There's still a quite large area in through here that does not have snow cover on the ground right now. A lot of this, again, is going to melt and get into the soil, which is going to be good later on. We have decent snowpack that is still in place here on the headwaters of the Mississippi River. This is important for the spring flooding issues we're going to have along the Mississippi River. But the headwaters of the Missouri, not the same scenario. When you come out west, the snowpack that is still here, much of this came in the month of December with the exception of what's gotten added here in the month of January in the northern Rockies and the Cascades. This has kind of sustained them through a very, very dry January. And I just want to do a quick comparison to where we were a year ago. Why don't you just keep your attention over here on the west for a moment. This was last year at this time. This is this year. There is currently more snow in the mountains as I kind of toggle back and forth than a year ago, but we had just had a system that rolled through last February at this time, bringing some light snow to Montana all the way to Nebraska, so you can kind of see some of the differences there. Now, we put all that together and we just say, all right, let's look at this one more time. This is what we've seen since the beginning of the new year. Central Valley of California, at least most of the San Joaquin down here, getting into the Mojave Desert. This is the driest January and early February on record. We can see, let's go back up here, sorry about that. We can see this region right in through here, very dry. Parts of the upper Midwest, very dry as well. And even though we had that one large system, of course, last week that dipped down, brought in the snow into this area, some ice, of course, and then raced on off to the north and east, this is still an area that we're watching drought expand. Now, thinking about all of this, I'm going to point out 3 big regions we're going to be talking about. We're going to, of course, talk about what's going on with La Niña. We're going to talk about the MJO, which runs right in through here, and we're going to talk about the cold water in the Gulf of Alaska. Now, up until this point in the season, I've just referred to the cold water in the Gulf of Alaska as a pattern we want to watch out for. And I've referred to it occasionally as the negative phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. Now, the reason why we're bringing it more into light now that we're into the month of February is up until this point, this has been building as a result of the changes in the pattern of December and January. And those were controlled by the fading La Niña and the MJO, which for a while was stuck here and is starting to open back up and move eventually back into the Indian Ocean. And yes, that's the wrong direction that the MJO typically progresses. It typically goes, from this direction to the east. But we need to see what those implications are. So let's have a discussion about the PDO, the negative phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. So what is it? It's when there's warm water here, kind of cold water that hugs the coast of North America and comes out over toward, Hawaii. That's it. That's what we're looking at here. Now, when we think about this historically, I just want to bring up a time series here. From about 2006 or 2007 through about 2013, the PDO was negative. Then from 14 through almost 2017, it was positive, and now it's back down negative again. So we need to just understand historically what this means. Now, as we look forward here in the next few months, let's blow that up so you can see it. February to March, it tends to produce quite an active pattern in through this area. So I just put kind of a bounding box around that. We tend to get better flow into the northwest as well. What I don't like about this is historically it correlates to drier conditions through the southern and high plains, the desert southwest over to California. That's just looking at the PDO and its historical relationship. So active east, drier plains and west. Now I'm going to jump way ahead a couple of seasons because we're going to continue to talk about this cold water and its potential expansion or contraction. We're going to have to see which it does all the way out into summer. And we have some information, of course, about summer. If the cold water in the Gulf of Alaska extends south and then comes off of the Baja Peninsula, that just tends to give us a pattern that favors just drier conditions across a broad sector here of the mid part of the United States. Now remember, June to August is already a dry time period for the West, so we can't use this statistical analysis, I think, as well in the West. But we worry about that area as a potential indicator of drought development here in the midsection of the country. So that's why this is going to be a major part of our discussion moving forward. Now, thinking about that, I want to show you currently what these ocean temperatures are forecast to do. So this is what we're expecting to see in February. Still very much an east-focused La Niña. There's still quite a bit of cool water here. What we're going to do is slide this forward 1 month at a time. So that's March, getting into April, May, June, July, and let's just go all the way to the end, to August, all right? Why not? What we do see during that time period is our La Niña fades and goes south. We do see the emergence of weak El Nino-like conditions, which means we're going to see a change pretty quickly in the trade wind pattern across the Pacific. I want to point out two other areas. You can still see that there is some cooler water in through here, but in the latest model runs, it has moderated. In other words, it was cooler in the previous run. That's why you keep your eye just north of Australia. Why I'm thinking about that is there's another oscillation that happens in the Indian Ocean. It's kind of like an El Nino, La Nina-like circulation, what we call it the IOD, the Indian Ocean Dipole. Now, let's come back over here and just take a look at what will happen with this La Nina, because every long-range model that I've assessed that has been consistent continues to show it fading. Reached that peak in December, and since then it has been fading slowly, and we expect that by the time we get into May and June, it'll be fully into what we call ENSO-neutral territory here. And there's the possibility that we have, some of these ensemble members, better than a quarter of them, actually taking us into El Nino-like conditions going into the into the next summer and possibly into next fall. That has important implications on our hurricane season. Now, I'm getting asked a lot of questions. I got 5 texts today from different people while I was on flight down to Florida to give a talk tomorrow. And then in addition to that, I got here and checked a bunch of emails that said, is this going to be just like 2012? And I'd like to just show you some of the differences and some of the similarities. Did 2012 come out of kind of a second La Nina? Yeah, it sure did. Take a look. The big one was in 2010-11, and then the weaker one was in 2011-12. Okay, see that would be the winters. And we're seeing something like that with La Nina. But, okay, take a look at the ocean temperatures by the time we got into July. The extensiveness, the area covered by the cold water that was in the Gulf of Alaska wasn't just isolated here. It stretched and deepened off the Baja, overtook, Hawaii. And it extended back to the Aleutian Islands and even over toward Japan. Now that was critical because what all of this essentially did was produced a blocking pattern over the Pacific that dipped into a trough over the west and then a large ridge that was really centered at times between Minnesota and North Dakota. And that produced that large blocking high pressure center that sat in the middle of the country and brought in some, just extreme heat and extreme drought. It was a great year for the West because the trough dipped in there. Something else to think about. The El Nino came on quite quick, and there was a large area of warm water that was there, and the extent of the cold water to the south was almost non-existent. And take a look at this. That Indian Ocean dipole feature I was talking about, look at all the cold water between Australia and Indonesia. Now, why I'm stressing all of that is because our current forecasts look a little different. So is 2012 in the analog package? Some people might want to include it in the analog package. I am not just yet. I don't have strong enough reason to say that these ocean temperatures, which are ultimately a symptom of the behavior of the atmosphere, are going to do like they did in 2012. Plus, there's differences in the way that the La Nina fades. the ocean temperatures in the North Atlantic and what's going on here north of Australia. And I think those differences are significant enough that we have to just consider, that 2012 is not going to be our strongest analog. Is there risk? There's always risk. I'm going to address that in just a few moments. So what do we have? Well, I just took you all the way out there to summer. The long-range models here for summer are continuing to kind of favor drier conditions where they've been from the southern plains north, extending this back into the northwest. I see, a really active, southwestern monsoon and very wet in the east. Now, these long-range models, as we kind of pick up on this pattern, let's just see how they got there. Let's go backward in time. In fact, can I take you back all the way to March, April, May? This is how things are shaping up in March, April, May. There are indications that from Northern California to the Pacific Northwest, we're going to return some better flow here. We'll talk about that in a second. We also see that this area stays active. The models have been in every long-range forecast this winter for spring, been dry along the Gulf Coast, yet that hasn't fully materialized yet. And they've also been aggressive on the drier conditions in the southern plains where there already is drought. Remember, this is how the models were initialized. They're going to keep that going for a while. But let's now slide back forward. So this is March, April, May. That's April, May, June. This is May, June, July, and all the way out there to June, July, August. Now you look at that and you start to construct this story in your mind, and I want to remind you that these are model forecasts. They're imperfect. They're based off of just a couple of dominant variables, specifically current soil moisture and drought area and the ocean temperature patterns when this is produced. Those are the two most dynamically consistent things that go into these forecasts. So you have to look at them, but you have to look at them and take them with a grain of salt. And I'd like to show you what I mean by that. First, I would like to give you the counterpart, the National Multi-Model Forecast, which is from models we run in the US and Canada. And let's go out there and just take a look at April, May, and June. Do you see a similar story? Wet here, but dry where there already is really dry conditions. They actually got better spring rains in the Canadian prairie as well. But let's keep stretching this on out. So that was the ensemble average. Let's go out another season here. This would be May, June, July. And they've continued that. They continue the drier forecast in that area. So we start to see this and concern begins to build because we know what's going on with South America and we understand that the production issues there are going to impact global balance sheet. And if we see anything that puts risk on the size of the crops across the United States, that could impact things as well. So I get it. I know why we're concerned about this. But I want to show you something. This was the Drought Monitor 1 year ago, right about now. Extensive drought trapped on the four corners, but it was also in the high plains, and it was pretty far to the north. And the drought that was here, was a snow drought. We were over 40 inches in deficit in snow in North Dakota at one point last year. So the Drought Monitor a year ago looked like that, and now looks like this. So there's actually more drought area this year, but the position and strength of it is different. See that? That's subtle. Now, we saw this, get this was the February 2021 forecast for May, June, and July of last year. And similarly, cooler water in through here. You can even see the warmer water shown up as, remember, last winter's La Niña did attempt to fade, but there was kind of an extension of warm water in this area. All right, what did the forecast say? Well, I saved them in a presentation from a year ago, and I posed a question. This was back in February when I did this. I said, do we have another year where the ridge retrogrades and develops west? Because the models for May, June, and July last year were going over very dry across a broad section here of the plains, the Midwest, the Western Corn Belt, extending this back farther. And look at this. They were going wetter through parts of the Canadian prairie, just dry along the south. Now, we know that the Canadian prairie actually had one of its driest growing seasons, driest summers on record. So this was a miss. But can I show you what actually happened for the time period of May, June, July? This is what happened. May, June, and July 2021. We did have drought west of the Mississippi River. We saw this extensively here. And the Northwest, extremely hot, one of the hottest summers, if not the hottest summer on record. But very wet south, very wet through this part of the Midwest into the Northeast, with drought developing over the Appalachian Mountains, right in through here in parts of West Virginia and Virginia. So you come back to this and you say, well, this was the forecast, and this was the verification. So this is why I want to just make a point here that a lot of this is speculative, but it's not as though we have every signal pointing toward a super wet year. That's the main takeaway at this point. So we've got multiple things to watch. Fading La Niña, how that interacts with what's going on in the Indian Ocean and the MJO, and then also what's going on with that negative PDO. That's the cold water in the Gulf of Alaska. Got to watch all of that. Now, what have we been dealing with lately, and what's all this talk about Miracle March? Okay, this has been the ridge. I've showed it to you in 3 videos in a row, I think now. That's our ridge from January into early February. So we've had this northwest convergent flow. The jet stream has gone around the west and the Pacific Northwest. It's been highly amplified and blocked, and we've really made things quite dry there. Now, if we think about what that PDO means going through February into March, there are indications that the PDO would favor a more westward ridge. Now, we would want this. We'd want the flow to come over the top and then dive into the west. This would give us a better chance of bringing up the precipitation in the month of March. But I want to let you know something. When the PDO is negative like this, subtropical component of the jet stream is non-existent. We just don't tend to get that, okay? So let's talk then about what could help out. Well, this is a continuation of what we've been discussing. For the first time this winter, really, the MJO was popped out back in the Indian Ocean, somewhere sitting between phase 2 and 3, mostly phase 3, and might slowly move over to phases 4 and 5 through the next, possibly through the month of February into early March. Now, we know a thing or two about that. MJO phase 3 in February promotes better ridging over the over the Aleutian Islands. And that would be ideal because we aren't going to get the strong subtropical flow. But if we can move the ridge back, that could allow more troughing here to bring in that moisture back and at least to Northern California. We'd love it all the way far as south as we can, but from Northern California to the Pacific Northwest, and then run over some sort of a ridge over the southeast, which gives us a very active month across not only the midsection of the country, but into the east as well. Now, thinking a bit more about this concept of the Miracle March, I went out and I grabbed those wettest marches since 1980, just to pick off a few here, since 1980. Where was the MJO? Well, it liked to be over here, starting in about phase 3 and rolling through phase 6, and maybe at times even sitting over phase 7 and 8. Now, the significance of that is where it transports that energy into, or that, not the energy, but the momentum into the jet stream just to its north. And so thinking about this, having the MJO in this vicinity, that was where it was most anomalous, but at times even getting over to phase 7 and 8 would be a positive thing. When that occurred, see where the ridge sat? So the flow, went something like this and then ran around. And that's what delivered all of the very wet conditions in March. Another part of it, if you just look at the anomalous flow during those very wet marches, we developed strong winds like this. The likelihood of this occurring this year, this far south, I'm talking about putting a low right here in March, that's low, that's limited. The chances of it being a little bit farther to the north here, should it develop, if that ridge moves back over to the Aleutian Islands, is higher. So what I'm saying right now is I don't think we're going to be able to get the full-blown miracle march that saves California's moisture situation. But I think we can get rid of the pattern we've had in January that's blocked us all up and caused problems. So let's go look at it. This is now the February 25th through March 25th outlook, and it continues to get less dry for California. We continue to see better moisture in through the mountains in the Pacific Northwest. And there are some indications that overall the flow is going to favor at least not a ridge sitting right here, but farther to the west. That's a good signal. No subtropical jet, just not seeing it develop at this point. What do we see though? Well, if the flow ends up doing some sort of ridging there and then comes in like this, okay, kind of dives in like that, it's got to make the turn, because if we do end up getting some sort of southeast ridging, which you can kind of see the drier conditions in through here, well, that means it has to turn and you get the troughs ejecting from kind of the base of the broader pattern, and the models have been very consistent with this area being wetter than average. They're persistent also with the drier conditions in Texas, which again is something I do not want to see. So we've got that as our outlook from the long-range European that goes out 45 days. So now we've assessed the long range going out several months. We've assessed the Miracle March question. Let's spend the rest of our time talking about the near-term pattern, because right now the jet stream isn't behaving according to what we want it to do. Look at this, screaming across the Pacific. Now that's very consistent with this MJO reset to phase 3, okay? And then splits just like this. All right, that split produces a broader trough here across the United States, a lot of convergent flow in the atmosphere. And the net effect of that is, well, we're going to get some strong winds here in the northern plains. But most of the United States, finally, I get to show you a relatively quiet all hazards weather map. And again, that's what happens when the flow comes around over the top and then dives here into the Midwestern part of the United States. So what do we end up getting? Well, our next week, again, continues to, on that split flow, to be drier than average in the west. We're going to talk about a lot of clipper systems. We're drier in through this area until we get past about the 14th or 15th. And I want to stress to you what I think might happen beyond there. Now today, I'm going to focus primarily on the European model. I'll explain why in just a few seconds, but this map shows us basically total accumulated precipitation all the way through next Tuesday. And again, you can see the active clipper track, but really dry most other places, except for some possible snow running through this area. I'll show you the snow map in just a second. Now, why I'm going to focus mainly on the European model is we've seen some odd behavior in the GFS throughout January. Several times its skill score has really dropped off, and that's right now one of the big times. So I'm going to stick with the European model and show you what we got from the 12Z run today. Now, as we played this forward, we did have some rain here across the East Coast, and this system is going to roll right up here off the coast, spreading some snow into Maine and parts of New Hampshire and Vermont. Not much, but some snow coming in this area, not like one of those monstrous nor'easters. Got a clipper running through the prairie, and as this goes forward, that clipper goes over the Great Lakes by Wednesday, and after it passes over the lakes, get some lake effect snow behind it, and the next clipper rolls through. There's a problem with these clippers. They're pretty far to the north, meaning that this region, very agriculturally productive region in southern Alberta and Saskatchewan, is going to miss on a lot of these. So that one goes right over the top of Lake Winnipeg, then dives into the Great Lakes area. See that? This is basically Thursday through Friday. Then it pulls on east, going to bring in some light rain into parts of the Midwest here. And then that system rolls out. In the meantime, big Arctic high builds in behind it for Saturday, and what you get here is some snow pushing up against the front range of the Rockies. That's very consistent with the placement of a high here. We saw that a lot here in the month of January and early February. Now after that, I'm just going to let this play on out. We go into this next weekend and even beyond that. Now what we have to watch going into early next week after Valentine's Day is this. See this high right here? And we know how this works. These high pressure cells have flow around them that's clockwise. We've seen a few model runs that have produced a high there that open up the Gulf of Mexico, while we get some sort of lee troughing here, low pressure developing. And this is an operational run. We cannot take this we can only take it for what it's worth, which is not much, but it tries to produce this system, right? See it there? That's like the 16th, 17th. Now, just know that we need to keep an eye out on this area during that time period if that high sets up over the East Coast. And we'll look at some ensemble support for it in just a few seconds. But before we do that, I just want to point out that over the next 7 days, this is going to be our region that gets the heaviest amount of snow, including some Great Lake effect snow. And like we said, it's going to be right here into New Hampshire and Maine that we get the biggest snows from that current system rolling through. Expect some light snow in the front range as well, but outside of that, we're not packing up much, which means this area, which has been missing out on the snow, continues its snow drought going forward. Probability of getting at least 3 inches kind of echoes what we just showed here. So lake effect snow, that'll be good. But other than that, it's going to come right down out of this path. The west not adding up much at all. So what about week 2? Well, the pattern, watch this. This is the 14th. Going to the 15th, 16th, and 17th. See that trough it's dropping there? That's the trough that's going to be associated with that potential system, the 16th, 17th, and 18th in the midsection of the country that moves into New England. What I'm watching after it is this ridge. So this is the 16th, 17th, 18th. And what we see here is that by the time we get in toward about the 20th of February, this is where the highest heights are compared to average. They're here today. So that would be consistent, that westward movement of the ridge, consistent with the PDO behavior, the MJO behavior, and the sooner we get that to the west, the better our chances are of returning troughing to the west and better precipitation. Now, most of week 2 doesn't get it. Okay, so we're still drier than average into week 2. But with that system coming out on that trough here, we're going to watch that one again, 16th, 17th, 18th, somewhere in that time frame. All right, let's finish up with temperatures and we'll get this one done. The polar vortex, right now its current strength is here, near record high. A year ago, we were coming off of the major drop in the polar vortex strength. And just to show you what that means, this is what the polar vortex looks like right now. The stronger those winds are in the stratosphere, look at it, sitting right over this part of Greenland. The stronger the polar vortex, the less likely of a nasty Arctic outbreak we're going to get. This is what it looked like again in 2021, same day on the 7th. Split into 2 pieces, big high pressure cell here, and this just funneled all that cold air in. So you're not going to be surprised when I show you that the temperatures are much, much different than they were a year ago. Very warm throughout the plains today, warm across the west, and this is Tuesday's highs. Compared to average, you can see the differences there. Getting into Wednesday, mild day across much of the United States. About the only cold places are down here in Florida or in the Snake River Valley compared to average. Going forward into Thursday, another very warm pulse of air coming here off the mountains. That's downslope flow. It's going to be windy and dry. We already know there's no snow there, but that doesn't help. There's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So any shots at colder air are just that. They're temporary. The ridge across the west is keeping things very warm, and the downslope flow here warm as well. Last couple of maps. This would be the day 5 through 10 outlook. Again, we're still going to see that ridge here until we get toward the end of the month. And when we look out there, day 10 through 15, this will be about the time period we start to see some moderation, some shifting around in this pattern. So I know we covered a lot today, but there was just a lot of great questions to ask and answer. And we're just going to continue this analysis throughout this week and provide better updates, or more updates, I guess I should say, on this Thursday. So I'll talk to you then. Thanks.